Hey guys, Knowles here again. We're going to work through phase one task creation. This is going to be a little bit faster video than before because we have a lot of reviews to get through. So we had talked about phase two before in a different video, and we're kind of doing this out of order. But phase one was what got kicked off a couple months ago. And this is the part where you're effectively looking at a pull request in GitHub and you're deciding, is it fair for the agent to check out? And what that really means is you're going to look at some of these metadata files that we've talked about. There's an interface file, there's a requirements file, there's a prompt and problem statement file, and then there is the test patch. Is the testing something that any implementation could pass? So what you're looking for is things like, is the testing for something very specific, a specific ordering, something that the agent might not be allowed to or might not know. So as a very simple example, if the output is expecting a specific string that says ABC and that's not listed in any of the other metadata files, either through the requirements JSON or in the interface, both in terms of like parameters it accepts and how it returns values, then you would flag this because it's 2 or 3. And so right here, you're looking at 0, 1, 2, and 3. If you've done work on Sweetbench before, anything that's a 0 or 1 can proceed, 2s and 3s should be flagged. So let's briefly talk about what that looks like. In Airtable, you're going to go to your task here. In dashboard, I already have a task right here. You would normally see a list here. This would be based on the language that you are hiring. If you don't see anything, you can ask to be added to other languages that you know. The main reason that you might not see anything is that we have batches, and each batch is only a certain percentage of each language that can be submitted, I guess, would be a good way to put it. So at some point we're going to reach our threshold for total Python tasks, and you won't see any. So you'll have a task here that you can click on. There'll be a claim task button. The important issue here is creation. We have the title of our task right here. This is a link to the actual pull request. So we open this up here. This is going to be like a good frame of reference point as you're working on the task. This is what the agent is going to effectively be asked to solve. We'll come back to here in a minute, but this is effectively the overarching diff. The metadata files that are pulled from part of the task. The test.patch is specifically the test files. The golden.patch is the actual solution that was here in the PR, and then the PR.patch is the entire diff altogether. Your branch name, excuse me, let's take a step back for a minute. You are going to have your own repository, GitHub, our Merkur code environment. So you can see that here. This PR is already here because I kind of ran through this last night, but I ran into some tooling problems. So what we're really interested in right now, and we'll talk about, is you're going to have your own fork from Merkur code environments, and that should automatically get made either, I believe, you claim your first creation task. So these are everyone's repositories here. It's based on whatever subset you're in. So we're in Agentic Bench, and then this is kind of my fork. The MQVHR is like my user ID, for lack of a better term. All these are forked off of this Imperium template, which contains tooling and other things that we need for CI and GitHub in order to build the task. So we're here. That should already exist. If not, ping us in the Slack channel. You then are going to have a branch. This REC, this alphanumeric string here, is the task ID. I'm not going to run through setting up GitHub CLI, but definitely do it. Otherwise, you have to do all this stuff manually. We're going to git clone our fork. We're going to go into the fork that we just cloned, basic Python environment, and then we're going to install. Okay, so I've already done that here, so I'll briefly show you that we are inside of my branch here. I am on my branch that I created, and more importantly, ignore upstream for right now. You would only have your origin, which is your environment right here. So once all that's done, you're going to go in here, and this is where you pull in the initial files you're going to use. You're going to click a Git S3 link. So it looks like that stays about the same. So you copy and paste all of this. This is going to basically pull in those initial files that we talked about, immediately create a branch. And the branch, as you notice, is named after the task ID itself. You're going to git add that folder, which should only be a handful of collection of files, which we'll show in a minute. You're going to then commit it and then immediately push. Before you do any work, it's very important that you absolutely create a PR immediately. And the reason that is because that establishes what the baseline is that came in from this tooling. So if you make changes before you push, we can't see like kind of what that back and forth look like over time. And that's very important because some of these files are LLM generated and sometimes they get things wrong. And sometimes you might need to fix it, which we'll get into. Once all of that is done, and I'll show you briefly what that looks like. So I'm here, I have a pull request. This is my task ID. Let's talk about the files that are changed real quick. Ignore the QC thing. That has nothing to do with this particular thing. I have some issues where very shortly my branch was working on, at some point we're going to move from the local tooling folder into an external tooling. And so that was something I was prototyping. So let's take a look at this real quick. Your freshly pushed PR should only have one SWE bench task and then the name of the task. If there's more than one, then you branched off of a branch or you've been working on multiple things. Definitely get that fixed. Reviewers will kick it back before we take a look at it. Things that are important in here is the Docker file, which builds the environment in which it. I actually just had an issue here where sometimes this might be wrong, and we'll talk about how you would figure that out. We then have the patches over here, PR, Golden, and test. We have the interface file. The interface file describes things that the implementation has to use in order to be able to pass. And what that really means at a very high level is the test.patch will reference these either functions or classes or variables or parameters, and it's establishing what the signature should look like so the agent doesn't have to guess. Otherwise, it would never be able to pass a test. The problem statement, generally speaking, is pulled from the body of the PR. So right here we see description, we need the ability to create tar archives, etc. If we go back to the original PR, that's not actually in here. So sometimes it's in here and sometimes it's not. So if it's not, that means somebody somewhere, either LLM generated this or somebody like in a previous instance of SWE-bench, this got generated by hand. This should be, if somebody's submitting a pull request to a open source repo, what do they expect to see from this? The second part here is the prompt. This should be human written and readable, meaning like it shouldn't read like a robot wrote it. It's not a system prompt. If you were at a Claude window or a ChatGPT window, you would be typing this in order to request this thing. The requirements file is a very specific granular series of things that at a technical level what it should be doing. And then that is kind of the collection of all of these things. So we'll get into what that would look like in a minute. Then you have the rubric. The rubric has three categories: functional, robustness, and style. Functional is literally what is the code doing. Robustness is more like edge cases. So let's say it has a function ABC and it takes in a string value. What happens for edge cases where the string is empty or the string is null or something like that? And so there's definitely a fine line between functional and robustness, and don't be frustrated or discouraged if there's a little bit back and forth with some of your review team. The guidance has changed over the last 6 weeks and sometimes continues to evolve, and there's always a fine line between something that's technically functional and technically robustness. But you guys can always hammer that out. The main one that we see a lot of issues with is style. Style specifically is referring to how the code is written in a way that the linter would see something. So we don't want to see stuff like actual linting, like white space or things that PEP 8 for Python would catch. We're looking for things like, is there consistency with type annotations? Do they use optional notation? Snake case, Pascal case, things like that. So we need at least 2 in each category. Don't go more than 15 for functional, more than 10 for robustness. Generally speaking, you want the most in functional from what we've seen. But quality is better than quantity here. I don't want to read through a list of 15 functional requirements. In addition, we want to ensure that they're not stacked. So if something functional says, I need to do A and B, that can't be in the same criteria because they have to be singularly verifiable. So in that case, you would split it across 2 criteria and say it does A, or A is performed and B is performed. And you want to not use like third person. So ideally, you don't want to say like the solution should do X. It should be function A returns X when Y. Inside of the examples here, we should have some good examples in writing the rubric. Yes, there's some good examples in here. I really like the when X, Y happens format, and that makes it easy to not stack, and also it makes it easy to identify actual critical functionality. The other core piece of this is wait. Generally, if it's absolutely critical, like it's mentioned in the requirements or it's mentioned elsewhere, it should be a major requirement. Style is usually minor because it's not going to fail the task if it doesn't do it. And this criteria is used for when the agent runs and it gets evaluated on this rubric. So let's go back. At the time that you push the PR, the body of the PR has a template here. So this is a checklist. So before you submit this for review, you need to make sure that all these things are done, and then you're going to check the box. So one of the first things the reviewer is going to do is make sure that quality control comes back clean, which we'll talk about in a minute, and that this checklist is followed. So what I like to do is my very first thing is I go in to look at the interface and I basically search through the test patch to make sure every single thing in the interface is actually being used in test patch. If it's not, then that might require a little bit more evaluation. Implementation agnostic means if in the interface it has a specific function or class name, do not reference it. Say something like ABC functionality does X. So that way you're not vague, but you're still specifically saying what the functionality should do without specifically tying it to a specific implementation. Unstacked means you can't have more than one thing. The only difference is, so generally watch out for conjunctive clauses, so ands and ors. If you have an and in there, you got to be very careful because there's only certain circumstances where and is okay. And the one circumstance that and is okay is where both things have to happen atomically. So if like function ABC receives X and returns Y, if any of those could be independently done by themselves, they should be separate criteria. But if in the conjunction of if when it receives X, it has to return Y or some equivalent, then you're allowed to stack it, and you would use terminology such as both. So you would say function ABC function both receives X and returns Y. That way it's coupled together, meaning it can't be split apart. The other thing that's really critical is the interface, the rubric, the problem, and the prompt statement all align. And what that really means is make sure that whatever they're asking for is what's actually being declared both in the interface and in the requirements JSON. The rubric should verify all aspects of the prompt and problem. Originally, you could copy and paste stuff from requirements into the criteria and kind of reword it. We have moved away from that because that's implementation specific. Using the requirements as a jumping off point for things that the rubric should cover is absolutely okay. That's a great basis point, but make sure that it's worded in a non-specific, implementation specific way. And then make sure that the test patch covers all the aspects of the prompt and problem. And the reason that might come up is for this one, this is a pretty clean PR. It's not too big. They've only changed 8 files. There's no associated ticket here. But sometimes you'll have PRs that have are an epic, and so there's like 4 or 5 tickets. And so because some of these things are automatically generated, as a writer, you need to go in and make sure that the prompt and problem do match what's actually being tested. You are allowed to modify any of these files specifically, and by any I mean you are allowed to modify the interface, the problem and prompt, and the requirements. You're not allowed to touch any patch files, especially not the test.patch file, and you're allowed to and required to update the rubric. So that was a lot of data dump. So let's kind of talk about what that flow looks like. So I've downloaded this. I've now pushed on my PR. I've decided that it's fair. The instructions here are stuff you can also talk about. Kind of what we just talked about. Definitely take a look. I got the rubric writing guidelines. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that right now. At this point, you're going to push to GitHub. Every single push to your fork runs GitHub Actions that do a quality control check. And so we'll look at that right here. When you first push, it's absolutely expected to be broken. And so what I'm talking about here is you'll see this task validation. That should always pass. Then you'll see this. So an LLM will run in the background and it will attempt to evaluate the task. And so right now it's basically failing. It's almost impossible to understand what's going on. I have no rubrics, like everything is just a mess. And the reason is that the rubric is basically invalid. What you want to see is this is approved. And I'll show you an example of what that means in just a minute. But if you ever need to check what the QI is doing on any push you have right here, there's either an X, a yellow circle, or this check mark, and this is all the list of the actions. If the Docker file is bad, I just had an example of that from a first-time writer with a task, you're allowed to go in and change the Docker file. Sometimes things get missed as part of the automated tooling. In this particular case, it was trying to run a raw echo command instead of using run echo in the Docker file. You might also see it's trying to copy a repo file. That's an artifact from a previous SweBench Imperium project. So definitely check out these logs, and it will show you what is going on. You have all the tasks. You're allowed to come in here and dig. If you have any issues, again, please ping anybody in the chat channel. We'll be happy to help. So let's show what an actual thing looks like. So we'll take one of the ones that I've written back in the past. So now this is clean. So this is my task that I've had. It's part of the checks that it does. Is everything there? Is it well specified? And then it does a quick evaluation of the rubric. And what you're looking for here before you submit this for review is approved. If this is coming back not clean and you disagree with what the QC is saying, put a comment here and we will inspect that upon review. If the QC is not clean and this is an older task, so we don't have the PR body. If the PR body checklist is not all checked, then the review will immediately kick it back, just as an establishment of the baseline. And then once you are ready, what happens here is that this is all checked, QC comes back clean, you're going to click ready for review here, and then that will update it in Airtable, and then that will enter the reviewer queue to review. When we review, we will go here and do like an actual review and like leave comments. It's expected to go through and kind of check out what our comments are. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to disagree and send us like a note about it. But by and large, we have a pretty good like workflow for at least phase one of what is expected. Definitely there are nuances with English language, so definitely watch out for the conjunctive phrases. Once your task is, so right now it's in progress because that PR is open, so originally it'll be claimed, then it'll be in progress once your PR gets submitted. Once you click ready for review, this will go to ready for review. When the reviewer reviews it, if we approve it, we will say great, awesome. We will approve it here, this approve right here, and then we will go ahead and merge, and then your task should disappear from your dashboard. If we request changes, it should show back up in Airtable as revising as the state. And then at that point, go ahead and make your changes, push your stuff, address all of the comments, and then you're going to mark it back ready for review, and that'll kick it back into the pipeline. Ideally, we don't want to go through more than 1 or 2 iterations, but there's also a lot of information that just got dumped on everyone in a very short period of time. So super high level executive summary. This is this is a phase 1 task creation. Using Airtable, you're going to pull down kind of the base metadata files. You're going to establish whether or not you think the task is fair. Is it reasonable to assume that a LLM or an agent can actually solve this problem without having anything hyper-specified? You are authorized and allowed to modify the prompt, the problem, the interface, the requirements JSON, and the Docker file as necessary. But also, it's possible that none of that needs to be updated. It really just depends on the task. You then are required to update the rubric. Definitely check out this form here. And at that point, you submit, and we'll go into a review cycle. Once these tasks are approved, you might notice that then they eventually filter into phase 2 baselining, at which point we are updating the rubric with trajectories and additional information as part of actually running the creation task you just made against an agent. So again, let us know if you have any questions, and see you around. One thing I forgot to put in the original video is that if you're working on this and it needs to be flagged, if you scroll to the bottom of Airtable, it'll have the instructions here. So the main thing we want to see is you update the body of the PR with a very detailed, specific reason of why you're flagging it, because somebody's going to come back and take a look at this later. You then go into your PR, and under milestones, there is a label. Sorry, label, not milestone. There we go, flag. And that'll update it in Airtable. The other thing that I want to point out again, just in case it wasn't explicitly clear, is that the overall build process, this should be green before you really start working on the task in earnest. If at any point something fails, go in and figure out what it is, because if it's something wrong with the underlying Docker file, then the issue is you might want to try to resolve that before spending any time on the task itself.